The Burj Khalifa's lights swept across Dubai's midnight skyline like a searchlight seeking something lost in the darkness, while 43 floors below, in a penthouse worth 18 million dirhams, blood soaked into Italian marble that cost more per square meter than most people earned in a month. Jasmine Reyes lay motionless on the floor of the master suite, her body positioned in a way that suggested desperate struggle before the final fatal blow. At 34 years old, she'd spent the last 6 years as the girlfriend of Viktor Romanov, a Russian businessman who owned 3 entertainment complexes across the UAE. Establishments that everyone knew were underground casinos operating in a country where gambling was officially illegal but unofficially tolerated for those with the right connections and enough money to buy silence. Just 12 hours earlier, Jasmine had been alive, beautiful, and terrified, having stumbled upon documents in Viktor's office that revealed a fraud scheme worth $50 million involving money laundering, ghost investors, and cryptocurrency manipulation. She tried to leave quietly, taking copies of the evidence with plans to disappear before Viktor discovered her knowledge. But in Dubai's surveillance state, where cameras tracked every movement and money bought loyalty from everyone, there was nowhere for a Filipina expatriate with no powerful connections to hide from a man who'd built his empire on corruption and violence. This is the story of how ambition, greed, and the dangerous allure of criminal wealth converged in a city where fortunes are made in shadows and witnesses who see too much simply disappear. Jasmine Marie Reyes was born on November 18, 1985, in Quezon City, Metro Manila, in a middle-class neighborhood called Cubao where jeepneys rattled past cramped apartment buildings, and the smell of street food mixed with diesel exhaust in air that was simultaneously vibrant and suffocating. Her father, Eduardo Reyes, worked as an accountant for a mid-sized import-export company, his steady but modest salary providing a lifestyle that was comfortable by Philippine standards. Not wealthy, but secure enough that the family of 4 didn't worry about daily survival the way so many of their neighbors did. Her mother, Patricia, was a public school teacher whose dedication to education extended to her own children. Jasmine and her younger brother, Carlo, grew up in a household where academic achievement was expected and celebrated, where books lined shelves in their small apartment, and where dreams of upward mobility through education were as natural as breathing. Patricia's salary supplemented the family income, while instilling in both children the belief that knowledge was the most reliable path out of limitation. Jasmine excelled academically from early childhood, showing particular aptitude in mathematics and business subjects that her father encouraged by teaching her basic accounting principles and involving her in analyzing his company's financial reports. She attended the University of the Philippines Diliman, one of the nation's most prestigious public universities, studying business administration with a focus on finance. Her intelligence was sharp and analytical, capable of seeing patterns in numbers that others missed, understanding market dynamics that made her professors suggest she pursue graduate studies abroad. But Jasmine possessed something beyond just academic brilliance. She was strikingly beautiful in a way that open doors education alone might not have unlocked. At 5'6" with delicate features, expressive dark eyes, and a graceful bearing that photographs struggled to capture, she attracted attention wherever she went. In Philippine society, where beauty was openly celebrated and commodified, Jasmine grew up understanding that her appearance was an asset that could be leveraged alongside her intelligence. Her first serious relationship began in her junior year at UP Diliman with Rafael Santos, a fellow business student from a wealthy Makati family whose father owned a chain of hardware stores. Rafael was handsome, ambitious, and introduced Jasmine to a lifestyle she'd only glimpsed from the outside. Restaurants where meals cost more than her family spent on groceries weekly, weekend trips to private beach resorts, parties where Manila's young elite networked and celebrated their privileges. For 2 years, Jasmine navigated the relationship's complexities, simultaneously attracted to the security Raphael represented and uncomfortable with the obvious class differences that his family never let her forget. The relationship ended badly in 2008, shortly after Jasmine's graduation. Raphael's family made clear that while she was acceptable as a girlfriend, she wasn't suitable as a wife. Her family's middle-class background, while respectable, wasn't the kind of pedigree they expected for their son's marriage. The breakup was devastating not just emotionally, but practically. Jasmine had begun imagining a future where Raphael's resources would provide the kind of stability and opportunity that her own family connections couldn't offer. At 23, with a business degree and a broken heart, Jasmine entered Manila's corporate world during the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis, when entry-level positions were scarce and competition was brutal. She secured a position as a financial analyst at a mid-tier investment firm, working 60-hour weeks for a salary that barely exceeded what her father earned despite her expensive education. The work was intellectually stimulating, analyzing company financials, evaluating investment opportunities, preparing reports for clients. But the compensation was inadequate for the lifestyle she'd glimpsed with Raphael and now couldn't forget. For 3 years, from 2008 to 2011, Jasmine worked in Manila's financial sector, building expertise and professional credentials while growing increasingly frustrated with the glass ceiling that limited career advancement for women without powerful family connections. She watched male colleagues with inferior skills advance faster, saw positions go to less qualified candidates whose surnames opened doors that merit couldn't unlock. The meritocracy she'd believed in throughout her education revealed itself as mythology. Success in the Philippines required connections and capital, not just competence. The decision to pursue work abroad came from a combination of ambition, frustration, and the increasingly common realization among educated Filipinos that their skills commanded better compensation and respect outside the Philippines. Dubai had emerged as a destination for Filipino professionals in finance, hospitality, and business services, a city where competence allegedly mattered more than family background, and where tax-free salaries could be 5 to 10 times what Manila offered. In early 2012, at 26 years old, Jasmine secured a position as a financial controller for a mid-sized property development company in Dubai, her credentials and interview performance earning her a package worth AED 18,000 monthly, roughly 240,000 pesos, more than double her Manila salary. The opportunity represented everything she'd worked for: financial success, international experience, and escape from the class limitations that had constrained her in Manila. Jasmine arrived in Dubai in April 2012, immediately struck by the city's ambitious architectural audacity and the surreal juxtaposition of futuristic development against desert landscape. The job was demanding: long hours analyzing property deals, evaluating financing structures, and managing books for developments that ranged from legitimate high-rises to projects that seemed designed more for money laundering than actual construction. But the compensation was real, the career advancement was tangible, and Jasmine sent substantial money home to her family while saving aggressively for her own future ventures. Her social life in Dubai was initially limited to the Filipino expatriate community, church gatherings, weekend brunches, and the familiar comfort of speaking Tagalog with people who understood the complicated mixture of pride and sacrifice that characterized overseas Filipino workers' experiences. She dated casually within this community, but found the men either unambitious or already committed to families back home. Jasmine wanted something more: a relationship that combined emotional connection with the kind of material success she'd glimpsed with Raphael but now sought on her own terms. The transformation from respectable financial professional to the girlfriend of a Russian criminal began innocuously in September 2013 at a business networking event at the Atlantis Hotel. Jasmine's employer had sent her to represent the company at a real estate investment conference where developers, financiers, and business brokers congregated to make deals. Viktor Romanov was there ostensibly as an investor interested in Dubai property, his true business, underground casino operations, known to those within certain circles but never openly discussed. Their first conversation was about investment strategies and Dubai's property market. Viktor impressed by Jasmine's sharp analytical mind and her ability to discuss complex financial structures with authority. He was 41, tall, imposing, and possessed the kind of dangerous charisma that made intelligent women temporarily stupid. His Russian accent made everything sound more interesting. His expensive watch and custom suits signaled success, and his attention felt like validation of Jasmine's worth beyond just her appearance. Viktor pursued Jasmine with the systematic intensity of someone accustomed to acquiring what he wanted. He invited her to dinners at Dubai's most exclusive restaurants, sent flowers to her office, and displayed the kind of focused attention that made her feel special rather than just pursued. He was intelligent, well-traveled, culturally sophisticated, and generous in ways that made Raphael's previous displays of wealth seem modest. Within 2 months, Jasmine had moved from her shared apartment in Dera to Viktor's penthouse in Dubai Marina, her previous life left behind as she entered a world of luxury she'd only imagined. Viktor Alexandrovich Romanov was born in 1972 in Moscow during the final decades of the Soviet Union, a period when official communism was gradually collapsing, and unofficial capitalism was emerging in the black markets and gray zones where those with ambition and amorality could build foundations for the fortunes they'd eventually amass after 1991. His father, Alexei Romanov, had been a mid-level Communist Party official whose position provided modest privileges, better housing, access to restricted goods, connections that mattered in a society where who you knew determined what you could access. The Soviet collapse in 1991 transformed Russia into a chaotic free-for-all where those positioned to exploit the privatization of state assets became oligarchs, while the majority descended into poverty. Viktor, 19 at the time, was perfectly positioned between education. He'd studied economics at Moscow State University and connections through his father's former party networks. The 1990s in Russia were wildly violent and corrupt, a period when organized crime and business were essentially indistinguishable, when fortunes were built through asset stripping, protection rackets, and exploitation of legal vacuums. Viktor's early career involved what he later euphemistically called import-export business, actually smuggling consumer goods from Europe to Moscow's hungry markets. He graduated to more sophisticated operations in the late 1990s, currency exchange manipulation, real estate schemes, and eventually casino operations in Moscow where gambling was legal, but the industry was completely controlled by organized crime syndicates. Viktor wasn't technically mafia, but the distinctions were academic. He paid protection, he laundered money, and he understood that violence was just another business tool to be deployed when negotiations failed. By 2005, Viktor had accumulated substantial wealth through his Moscow casino operations. But Russia's increasingly unstable political environment and Vladimir Putin's consolidation of power made wealthy individuals without direct Kremlin connections vulnerable to asset seizures disguised as anti-corruption campaigns. Viktor made the strategic decision to internationalize his operations, moving capital offshore and establishing operations in jurisdictions where money and connections could buy the kind of protection that Russian law no longer guaranteed. Dubai emerged as perfect territory for Viktor's expansion. The UAE offered tax-free business environment, minimal financial oversight, a cosmopolitan atmosphere that attracted wealthy international clientele, and most importantly, a cultural approach to law enforcement that pragmatically overlooked certain criminal enterprises if they were conducted discreetly, and if the operators had sufficient wealth and connections to be valuable to local power structures. Gambling was officially illegal in the UAE under Islamic law, but Dubai's underground casino industry flourished in private clubs and entertainment complexes that operated with the kind of open secret status that characterized many of the city's vices. These establishments catered to wealthy expatriates, tourists, and locals with enough money to access spaces where religious law was conveniently overlooked. Viktor opened his first club in 2007 in a villa in Emirates Hills, his operation protected through a complex structure of bribes to police officials, payments to local sponsors who provided the legal cover of Emirati ownership, and careful management of clientele to ensure only wealthy, discreet customers gained access. The business model was extremely profitable. High-stakes gambling with house advantages guaranteed consistent revenue. Alcohol sales in a country where liquor licenses were restricted provided additional income. And most profitably, the casino operations served as perfect vehicles for money laundering. Dirty money from various criminal enterprises across Asia, Russia, and the Middle East could be cleaned through casino wins, property purchases, and legitimate business investments. By 2013, when he met Jasmine, Viktor operated 3 establishments across Dubai and Abu Dhabi, his operations generating approximately $50 million in annual revenue with profit margins exceeding 60%. He'd assembled a network of corrupt officials, legitimate business fronts, and criminal associates that made his enterprises essentially untouchable. His lifestyle reflected his success. The 18 million dirham penthouse, a collection of luxury vehicles, properties in London and Monaco, and the kind of casual relationship with wealth that made million-dollar decisions feel routine. But Viktor's empire was built on foundations more fragile than they appeared. The casino operations required continuous bribes to officials whose cooperation wasn't guaranteed, political changes, law enforcement campaigns, or simply demands for larger payments could threaten everything. The money laundering schemes depended on increasingly sophisticated cryptocurrency mechanisms to evade international financial tracking systems that were slowly closing loopholes. And most dangerously, Viktor's success had attracted the attention of Russian organized crime figures, who viewed his Dubai operations as either opportunities for partnership or territories to be taken over through violence. His relationship with Jasmine began as a pleasant distraction, a beautiful, intelligent woman who provided both aesthetic appeal and intellectual companionship, but gradually evolved into something more complex. Viktor found himself genuinely attracted not just to Jasmine's beauty, but to her sharp mind and her ability to understand financial complexities. Over their 6-year relationship, he increasingly trusted her with aspects of his business, initially just having her review property investment documents, then gradually involving her in more sophisticated financial analyses. This was Viktor's fatal mistake, allowing someone with genuine moral boundaries and no criminal investment in his enterprises to become familiar with the mechanisms of his operations. Jasmine was useful for her financial expertise, but unlike Viktor's other associates whose complicity in criminal activity ensured their silence, Jasmine remained fundamentally an outsider who could become a threat if she ever fully understood what she was seeing. For 6 years, from 2013 to 2019, Jasmine lived in luxury that exceeded even her most ambitious imaginings. The penthouse was her home, designer clothes filled closets the size of her family's entire Quezon City apartment, and international travel was casual rather than aspirational. Viktor was generous, affectionate when it suited him, and treated Jasmine more as partner than possession, unusual for men of his background and temperament. She accompanied him to business dinners, managed aspects of his legitimate property investments, and existed in the comfortable space of willful ignorance where she knew Viktor's wealth came from questionable sources, but never examined the details too closely. The arrangement worked because Jasmine had rationalized away her initial ethical concerns. Viktor's casinos weren't violent enterprises. They were just providing entertainment to wealthy adults who could afford to gamble. The money laundering was abstract financial maneuvering that didn't directly harm anyone she could identify. And the luxury lifestyle he provided allowed her to support her family far beyond what her legitimate career could have offered. Her parents now lived in a spacious house in a good neighborhood. Her brother Carlo had completed his medical degree with Viktor's financial assistance, and Jasmine sent monthly remittances that positioned her as the family's success story. But the relationship had its shadows. Viktor could be cold and controlling, his displays of generosity alternating with periods where he treated Jasmine as valuable property rather than equal partner. He monitored her movements, restricted her social circle to people he approved, and made clear through subtle threats that leaving him would have consequences. Jasmine had occasionally considered ending the relationship, but the practical reality was that she'd become dependent on his wealth, her own savings modest because Viktor insisted on covering all expenses directly rather than giving her independent financial resources. The discovery that would ultimately lead to her death began innocuously on March 15, 2019. Viktor was traveling to Moscow for business meetings, leaving Jasmine alone in the penthouse for 5 days. Unusual because he typically brought her along or arranged for security to monitor her closely during his absences. She used the opportunity to catch up on personal tasks, video call her family, and enjoy brief freedom from Viktor's constant presence. On March 17th, Jasmine was searching Viktor's home office for property documents he'd asked her to review before his return when she accidentally knocked over a stack of folders, their contents spilling across the floor. As she gathered the papers, certain phrases caught her attention: ghost investor, cryptocurrency wash, phantom property transactions, financial terminology that triggered her professional instincts. She began reading more carefully, initially just curious, then increasingly alarmed as she recognized sophisticated fraud schemes. The documents revealed a multi-layered operation more complex and criminal than Jasmine had imagined. Viktor wasn't just running underground casinos. He was operating a massive money laundering network servicing criminal organizations across Asia and the Middle East. The scheme worked through multiple mechanisms. Ghost investors, fictional wealthy individuals whose identities were used to purchase Dubai properties with money from drug trafficking, arms dealing, and other criminal enterprises. The properties would be held briefly, then sold at artificial profits that legitimized the funds. Cryptocurrency manipulation. Dirty money was converted to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, run through multiple digital wallets to obscure origins, then converted back to clean currency through Viktor's casinos, where the funds appeared as gambling winnings. Phantom property development. Viktor's property company claimed to develop buildings that were never constructed or were wildly overvalued, allowing criminal investors to claim losses for tax purposes while actually receiving their money back through offshore accounts. The total value of the fraud scheme was approximately $50 million annually, with Viktor taking a 15–20% fee for laundering services. The documents included names of criminal organizations, corrupt government officials, and financial institutions that were complicit. Most concerning, they detailed payoffs to Dubai police officials and government administrators who protected Viktor's operations from investigation. Jasmine spent hours reading through the documents, her financial training allowing her to understand the sophistication and scale of what Viktor had built. This wasn't just questionable business. This was serious organized crime with international reach. The people involved weren't just wealthy gamblers but drug cartels, arms traffickers, and organized crime syndicates whose money Viktor was cleaning. And Jasmine, by virtue of living with Viktor and reviewing his documents, was potentially complicit in the eyes of law enforcement. The ethical awakening was sudden and complete. Jasmine had rationalized Viktor's casino operations as victimless crimes, but this was different. This was enabling violence, drug trafficking, and corruption on a massive scale. Her comfortable life was built on blood money in the most literal sense, and she had detailed financial knowledge that made her both valuable witness and potential target if Viktor ever decided she knew too much. Over the next 2 days, March 1819, Jasmine made careful preparations. She photographed the most incriminating documents using her phone, uploaded them to a secure cloud storage account Viktor didn't know about, and created physical copies that she hid in her gym bag. She researched whistleblower protections in the UAE, essentially non-existent for foreign nationals without diplomatic immunity. She contacted a lawyer through encrypted messaging, asking hypothetical questions about legal exposure for someone with knowledge of financial crimes. The answers were terrifying. Without immunity deals negotiated before disclosure, she'd likely be prosecuted alongside the primary criminals. The most obvious solution was to simply leave, return to the Philippines with the evidence, provide it to international law enforcement, and hope that distance and anonymity would protect her from Viktor's reach. But Jasmine knew Dubai's surveillance infrastructure made disappearing difficult, and Viktor's criminal connections extended far beyond the UAE. Her family in the Philippines would be vulnerable to retaliation. She needed to leave carefully with protections in place, not just flee and hope for the best. Her plan was to wait until Viktor's next extended business trip, then fly to Singapore where she had friends and could make contact with international law enforcement from a jurisdiction that wasn't completely penetrated by Viktor's corruption network. She'd leave a letter for Viktor claiming she was ending the relationship, but without mentioning the documents, giving him no reason to suspect she'd discovered his fraud schemes. It wasn't a great plan, but it was the best she could devise given her limited options. But Viktor's security network was more extensive than Jasmine realized. The penthouse had hidden cameras in his office that recorded her discovery and documentation of the files. His IT security team monitored all devices connected to the penthouse network, flagging Jasmine's unusual upload activity to cloud storage. And his assistant, who Jasmine had thought was friendly, was actually paid to report any suspicious behavior by Viktor's girlfriend. Viktor received alerts about Jasmine's activities while still in Moscow. He reviewed the security footage showing her photographing documents, read reports about her encrypted lawyer consultations, and understood immediately that his girlfriend had become a liability. His response was coldly pragmatic. Jasmine had to be eliminated before she could provide evidence to authorities or competitors who might use the information to destroy his operations. Viktor returned to Dubai on March 20th, 2 days earlier than his announced schedule, arriving at the penthouse at 11:00 p.m. when Jasmine was preparing for bed. His demeanor was normal, affectionate even, giving no indication of what he knew or what he planned. They talked about his Moscow trip, made love, and went to sleep in what Jasmine thought was their normal routine. She had no idea that Viktor had already decided she would die, that the question was only timing and method to ensure her death appeared accidental, or at least couldn't be definitively traced to him. March 21st, 2019, began as an ordinary Thursday. Jasmine woke at 7:00 a.m., prepared breakfast for herself and Viktor, and spent the morning working on legitimate property investment analyses Viktor had requested. Viktor was unusually attentive and warm, asking about her family and discussing potential vacation plans, behavior that Jasmine interpreted as affection, but which was actually Viktor establishing the appearance of a normal, loving relationship for the benefit of household staff who might later be questioned. At 2:00 p.m., Viktor suggested they have an early dinner together at the penthouse rather than going out, claiming he wanted privacy after his travels. He sent the household staff home for the evening, unusual but not unprecedented, when he wanted intimate time alone with Jasmine. They cooked together, drank wine, and talked about mundane topics, all of it recorded by security cameras that Viktor could edit later to establish whatever narrative he chose. The confrontation began at 8:30 p.m., after darkness had fallen over Dubai and the isolation of being 43 floors above the city became oppressive. Viktor's demeanor shifted suddenly from warm to cold as he placed a folder on the dining table, the same documents Jasmine had photographed days earlier. "You've been very curious about my business," Viktor said, his voice carrying none of the affection from hours earlier. "Want to discuss what you found?" Jasmine's stomach dropped, fear flooding her system as she realized Viktor knew about her discovery. "I accidentally saw some documents. I didn't mean to." "You photographed them?" Viktor interrupted, his voice flat and terrifying in its calmness. "You uploaded them to cloud storage. You consulted a lawyer about legal exposure. These aren't actions of someone who accidentally saw something." "I was trying to understand your business," Jasmine said, her voice shaking. "I wasn't going to tell anyone. I just wanted to know what I was involved in." "And now you know," Viktor replied. "You know I launder $50 million annually for criminal organizations. You know the names of people who would kill entire families to protect their identities. You know which officials are paid, which financial institutions are complicit. You know everything." "I won't tell anyone," Jasmine pleaded desperately. "I'll delete the photos. I'll forget everything I saw. We can go back to how things were." Viktor's laugh was harsh and devoid of humor. "You can't unknow what you know, and I can't trust someone who's already consulted lawyers about whistleblower protections. You were planning to leave, to take this information to authorities or sell it to my competitors." "No," Jasmine insisted, though they both knew it was partially true. "I love you. I wouldn't destroy you." "Love," Viktor repeated with contempt. "You loved the lifestyle. You loved the money. You loved what I could provide, but you never actually knew who I was, and now that you do, you're terrified. I can see it in your eyes." The conversation continued for another hour, Viktor methodically explaining why Jasmine had become a liability he couldn't afford, while Jasmine desperately tried to convince him she could be trusted. She offered to sign non-disclosure agreements, to move to another country without the documents, to do anything that would allow her to live. But Viktor had already made his decision, and the conversation was merely prelude to what he'd planned. At 10:00 p.m., Viktor suggested they move to the master suite to continue talking more comfortably. Jasmine, still hoping to negotiate her survival, followed him to the bedroom. Once there, Viktor's demeanor shifted to physical aggression. He grabbed her phone, smashing it against the marble floor, then shoved Jasmine hard enough that she stumbled backward. "You stupid woman," Viktor shouted, his careful control finally breaking. "You thought you could threaten me. You thought you could leave with my secrets and I'd just let you go." Jasmine tried to run toward the bedroom door, but Viktor was faster and stronger. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around and striking her across the face with enough force to split her lip. Jasmine screamed, the sound swallowed by the penthouse's sound insulation that prevented anyone in adjacent units from hearing. She fought back desperately, scratching at Viktor's face and trying to kick him, but the physical mismatch was overwhelming. The murder weapon was improvised, a heavy crystal award from Viktor's desk, some business recognition that he grabbed as Jasmine tried to crawl away from him. The first blow caught her on the back of the head, stunning her enough that her movements became uncoordinated. The second blow was fatal, fracturing her skull and causing the massive brain hemorrhage that would kill her within minutes. Viktor stood over Jasmine's body, breathing heavily, watching her convulse briefly before going still. The marble floor pooled with blood, the scene gruesome and unmistakable as violence. For several minutes, Viktor simply stood there processing what he'd done, calculating his next moves, transforming from killer back into businessman solving a problem. The cover-up was methodical. Viktor reviewed security footage, identifying angles that showed the murder clearly and those that could be edited to support an alternative narrative. He called his head of security, a former Russian military intelligence officer who specialized in cleaning up problems. Within 2 hours, the bedroom had been documented, the body photographed from every angle, and preparations made for disposal. Viktor's plan was to stage Jasmine's death as a suicide. She'd been depressed, he'd tell authorities, struggling with homesickness and the isolation of life in Dubai. She'd jumped from the bedroom balcony while he was in the shower. The fall from the 43rd floor would obliterate most forensic evidence of the beating that preceded it. Security footage would be edited to remove the confrontation, leaving only images of a loving couple having a quiet evening before tragedy struck. But one element of the crime scene couldn't be easily explained. Jasmine's desperate resistance had left scratches on Viktor's face and defensive wounds on her hands that forensic examination would recognize as evidence of struggle. Viktor's security team doctored the footage and prepared false witnesses, but they couldn't alter the physical evidence embedded in both bodies. At 1:30 a.m. on March 22nd, Viktor called Dubai police to report his girlfriend's suicide. The responding officers found Jasmine's body on the pavement 43 floors below the penthouse, her injuries consistent with a high fall but also showing signs that prompted immediate suspicions. Viktor, with fresh scratches on his face that he claimed came from trying to stop Jasmine from jumping, gave a statement about her supposed depression and his devastation at failing to save her. But the crime scene investigators saw evidence that contradicted Viktor's story. Blood patterns in the bedroom indicating violence before the fall, defensive wounds on Jasmine's hands and arms suggesting she'd fought an attacker, and the suspicious editing of security footage that showed gaps during the critical period. Within hours, Viktor Romanov was detained for questioning, and the investigation that would uncover his entire criminal enterprise had begun. The investigation into Jasmine Reyes' death was led by Senior Detective Khalid Al-Mansouri of Dubai Police Criminal Investigation Department, a 30-year veteran known for his methodical approach and resistance to the corruption that had penetrated other parts of law enforcement. Al-Mansouri immediately recognized Viktor's suicide narrative as implausible, the evidence of struggle too obvious to overlook, and the edited security footage too suspicious to accept. The first break came from Jasmine's cloud storage account. During the search of the penthouse, investigators found her laptop and accessed her encrypted files using passwords her family provided. The documents she'd photographed revealed the full scope of Viktor's criminal operations, not just the murder but the massive fraud and money laundering schemes that had been running for years. This evidence transformed the investigation from a single murder case into an international criminal investigation involving multiple law enforcement agencies. Interpol was notified within 48 hours, as the documents showed criminal connections spanning Russia, China, Middle East, and Southeast Asia. The FBI became involved because some of the laundered money originated from drug trafficking organizations targeting American markets. The European Union's law enforcement agency, Europol, participated because Viktor's cryptocurrency schemes involved European financial institutions. What began as investigating one woman's death became dismantling a major international money laundering operation. Viktor's protective network began crumbling almost immediately. The police officials he'd been bribing were themselves investigated and arrested, their corruption exposed through the financial records Jasmine had documented. The local Emirati sponsors who provided legal cover for his casino operations were prosecuted under laws against facilitating criminal enterprises. The international criminal organizations whose money Viktor had laundered distanced themselves, some cooperating with authorities to receive lighter sentences in their own cases. The murder charges against Viktor were reinforced by forensic evidence that his defense team couldn't explain away. The blood patterns in the bedroom proved Jasmine had been attacked before her fall. Her defensive wounds indicated she'd fought desperately for her life. The scratches on Viktor's face contained Jasmine's DNA under his fingernails and his DNA under hers. The edited security footage's original versions were recovered from cloud backups, showing the entire confrontation and murder. And most damningly, Viktor's own security team members, facing prosecution themselves, testified about his orders to cover up the murder. The trial began in September 2019 and lasted 8 months, complicated by the international nature of the evidence and the involvement of multiple jurisdictions. The prosecution presented overwhelming proof of premeditated murder. Viktor had known about Jasmine's discovery for days, had planned her killing, and had attempted to cover it up through elaborate deception. The financial fraud charges added to his culpability, demonstrating his willingness to eliminate anyone who threatened his criminal empire. Viktor's defense attempted multiple strategies. They argued Jasmine's death was accidental during an argument that became physical. They claimed the financial documents were fabricated. They suggested Jasmine herself was complicit in the criminal operations and had threatened to expose Viktor unless paid off, framing the confrontation as self-defense against blackmail. None of these narratives withstood scrutiny against the physical evidence and documentary records. The verdict came in May 2020. Guilty of first-degree murder, money laundering, operating illegal gambling enterprises, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Viktor Romanov was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, a severe sentence that reflected both the brutality of the murder and the massive scope of his criminal operations. His assets, approximately $80 million in identified wealth, were seized and distributed among various jurisdictions as recovered proceeds of crime. The international criminal organizations whose money Viktor had laundered faced their own prosecutions, Jasmine's documents providing evidence that led to over 50 arrests across 10 countries. The corruption within Dubai's police force and government administration led to internal investigations and reforms, though cynics noted that such reforms were often temporary responses to public scandals rather than permanent cultural shifts. Jasmine's family received her body in April 2019, burying her in Quezon City after a funeral attended by hundreds from the Filipino expatriate community in Dubai who contributed to a fund supporting her parents. The grief was complicated by revelations about Jasmine's life, her relationship with a criminal, her inadvertent involvement in his schemes, and the dangerous situation she'd found herself in. Some judged her harshly for living off criminal proceeds. Others recognized her as a victim who'd made understandable choices in pursuit of security, and who'd ultimately tried to do the right thing despite the personal cost. The settlement from Viktor's seized assets provided Jasmine's family with approximately $2 million in victim compensation, money that ensured her parents' security and funded her brother Carlo's medical practice. They established a foundation in her memory providing financial literacy education and job placement assistance for Filipino workers considering overseas employment, hoping to prevent others from ending up in situations where survival seemed to require compromising values. The broader impact of Jasmine's death led to increased scrutiny of Dubai's underground casino industry, though most observers agreed the attention would fade and operations would resume once the scandal passed. The money laundering schemes she'd exposed led to tightened cryptocurrency regulations and increased international cooperation on tracking suspicious financial flows. Her murder became a case study in law enforcement, training about the vulnerabilities of witnesses and the importance of providing protection for those who discover criminal operations. The questions Jasmine's story raises are ethically complex. At what point does living with a criminal's money make someone complicit in their crimes? What obligations do people have to report criminal activity when doing so puts them in danger? How do we balance survival needs against moral imperatives when the systems meant to protect whistleblowers are inadequate or corrupt? These questions don't have simple answers, but Jasmine's death forces us to confront them. 5 years after her murder, Jasmine Reyes is remembered in the Filipino community as a cautionary tale about the dangers of relationships with powerful men whose wealth comes from criminal sources. Her story is taught in expatriate worker orientations as a warning about the risks of becoming too deeply involved in employers or partners' business operations without understanding their true nature. Her name appears on memorials recognizing overseas Filipino workers who died abroad, though the circumstances of her death remain controversial. Viktor Romanov serves his life sentence at Dubai Central Prison, his wealth gone, his empire dismantled, and his name permanently associated with murder and massive fraud. He has given no interviews and expressed no remorse, maintaining through his lawyers that Jasmine's death was a tragic accident during a domestic dispute. Few believe this narrative, but Viktor has shown no indication that others' opinions matter to him. The penthouse where Jasmine died has been sold and renovated, the new owners unaware or unconcerned about its history. The underground casinos Viktor operated were shut down officially, though similar operations continue elsewhere in Dubai with new operators who learned from Viktor's mistakes about keeping security tight and witnesses silent. The criminal economy he serviced has adapted to his absence, finding new money launderers and new mechanisms for cleaning dirty funds. In Quezon City, Jasmine's parents maintain her childhood bedroom as a memorial. Photographs showing her progression from bright university student to successful Dubai professional to the tragic end of a life that should have had decades remaining. Her mother, Patricia, retired now from teaching, speaks occasionally at events about her daughter's story, emphasizing both pride in Jasmine's accomplishments and warning about the dangers of relationships where wealth comes from sources that can't withstand scrutiny. May Jasmine's memory remind us that no amount of luxury justifies compromising our integrity, but also that the systems meant to protect those who try to do the right thing often fail the most vulnerable. May her death inspire better protections for whistleblowers and witnesses who risk everything to expose criminal operations. And may we never forget that behind every financial scheme and criminal empire are human beings whose lives are destroyed when greed and violence meet. The $50 million fraud scheme Jasmine uncovered was built on the suffering of countless victims. Drug addiction funded by traffickers whose money Viktor laundered, violence enabled by arms dealers whose funds he cleaned, corruption sustained by officials whose bribes he facilitated. Her decision to document these crimes, despite the personal risk, represented a moment of moral courage that cost her everything, but also dismantled an operation causing harm across continents. Her story is not just about murder, but about the impossible choices facing people who discover they're complicit in systems larger and more dangerous than they understood. It's about the fragility of security built on criminal foundations. And it's about the deadly consequences when knowledge becomes liability in the eyes of those whose empires depend on silence.